Hello, and welcome to Writer's Block. I'm your host, Adelina. Let's find your story. Congratulations on finishing your first draft. It's a pretty big deal, even if you wouldn't want anyone to read it, because I know that I would not want a single person to go through reading through any of my first drafts that I have ever made because they have all been so bad. And you ask any author or writer in general with any project that they do with their first draft, that stays between you and your writing software or your notebook, whatever you write on. That's it. That's in between you and your writing. Okay, doesn't go anywhere else. And listen, it's it can be a little bit painful to uh to read it. So that's why you let it sit for like a couple weeks up to a month. And now usually after usually when you write your draft, you don't want to get into a writing slump, right? You let it sit for too long, you get into a slump. But with your first draft, it's good to let it sit and then come back at it with fresh eyes that like you haven't even been within that story, for the past couple weeks to a month because it's just it if you look at it too soon because you've been in the story, you won't come at it from a perspective of it like just looking at it objectively and wow, like this sucks and this sucks and this sucks because it's gonna suck. That's just kind of the fact of the matter. And if if you can't get like over the fact that it's gonna suck, then I don't know what to tell you. But there are ways of being like, well, this is my first draft. It's gonna get so it's only gonna go up. It's gonna soar. It's gonna fly. It's gonna like High School Musical, soaring, flying. Okay, okay. It's gonna get so much better from here. It's only going up. Okay, when you look at your first draft, and if you feel really crappy about it, because you probably will, just know it's only gonna go up from here. That's just it. But so after you let it sit. Say it with me. After I finish my first draft, I will let it sit. Thank you. Now, after you let it sit, read through it. Don't don't edit anything. You can take notes, take notes. Do not do not edit anything. Make notes, write down specific spots, whatever. Don't edit anything because you want to read it very objectively without like putting yourself like into like, oh, there's a comma that needs to go here and a comma that needs to go there and like this wording sucks. Write it down somewhere else, but leave it blank. Okay, take notes. Don't take notes about grammar issues, but like anything like big, like anything that you want to add with characters, plot holes, whatever. You're gonna want to write those things down when you come back, and then you're gonna actually like edit on the page. Um, I recommend printing it out and physically editing it if you can. If you can't, no big deal. Like just do it within a software that you can add like comments onto, like in a Google Docs. If you're doing it in Google Docs, which honestly is like one of the easiest softwares to use. I don't like writing my first few drafts in Google Docs. I have a software called Story Architect because I won't be focused on any grammar issues or any spelling mistakes or anything because they don't correct any of that in that software, which I appreciate because it just allows me to write. It just allows me to write without being like in a software like Google Docs, you get like the little blue squigglies or the red squigglies under the thing, you know, about like grammar and typos or like word suggestions and stuff. And while that can be helpful, it's not helpful for your first draft. So I like to use Story Architect. It's completely free. And it won't like correct you on like grammar mistakes and stuff, which is really helpful, especially when writing something like your first draft. So even if you use a separate software like Story Architect, like just copy and paste it into Google Docs, and then or like another software if you have a software that like, can allow you to like add comments on it and whatnot. If you want to um, go through like in your reading it in Google Docs, and then you can make like comments about certain sections. So then you're also not like looking at your notes, but like, oh, page 25, and you have to like this phrase and whatnot. Um, then you actually have like so that is a plus to it, but also um reading it physically on a piece of like on paper is a lot better. Um in my opinion, it's a lot nicer to have, especially because then you're also when you're going back into Google Docs and or whatever software you don't have a bunch of stuff like clogging it up, and you can just like that's your clean draft versus your rough draft. And you can also like make a copy, but then you're also like switching back and forth between tabs, and it's kind of annoying. So it's nice to have like two different things. Unless you have like an iPad or something or like another device that you can use, which would be super nice. Honestly, if you can do it on an iPad, I didn't even think about it. I don't have an iPad. Um, it's wandering in my brains right now is what's happening. But like something like even like on an iPad is better than on a laptop. Or do not do it on your phone. Do not. Do not. No. Never. Don't do it on your phone. That will trip you. Like if you have to do it on a laptop, that's fine. Paper or on like an iPad would be best for reading and taking notes. And then after that, guess what time it is? It's time to edit. Yay! So going in grammar, I don't even like what's your second draft? Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about grammar until after your third draft. I'm being so for real. Like do not worry about grammar until your fourth, fifth, whatever draft, because what you really get to do is get your story solid and get um just add as much as possible that's needed, take away stuff that's not needed, that's like filler. Don't write filler. It's useless, it's stupid, it's boring. Nobody needs it. An immediate turn off for readers, okay? If a story has filler and I'm just kind of like, yeah, it's not really needed for the plot, I'm shutting that book. I'm shutting the book among a lot of other people, because if you write something that's like filler, it's not needed. You should not have filler in your books, because filler is a term for people who don't know what to write and their stories actually aren't that great and cohesive. That's what it is. Filler is for people who don't know how to properly write. Filler is useless and should never be used ever. And I stand by that 100%, because everything that you write, every single word that you write down should be important to your story in one way or another, because it's like every single detail, every single thing needs to be like methodically thought out and just like placed. Because like think of like what like your day-to-day stuff, like you're doing stuff, but like you never like you do stuff as like filler, but you're also doing them for a reason. Like okay, like oh well, I'm gonna scroll on Instagram reels for like 10 minutes, But you're doing that for a reason, and your reason is because you want to zone out, or like you're waiting for something or whatnot. So like that's not necessarily filler. Like nothing that we really do as people, whether or not like we're thinking about it, is filler. Which is why I think when you're trying to write a book and characters and with all of that, like we never really do anything in our life like without reason. We never do anything that would be considered filler. So why would you put something like that in a story? Like even like something like words in like a more modern story, like oh like and she like was scrolling on Instagram reels and stuff. It's like oh that's relatable because I do that too. That's not filler in a sense. Like I'm just trying to like come up with something, right? Like in your story, like obviously that person, whoever in your story is scrolling on Instagram reels because it's kind of like a modern day YA or like just like a modern day kind of contemporary story. Um and the person is scrolling on Instagram reels, like, that's gonna they are scrolling on Instagram reels not as a point to relate to the audience as well as like being a person navigating their day-to-day life, like I guarantee I scroll on Instagram reels at least like 4 times a day. It's like, right, like a lot of people will scroll because like okay, well I got nothing to do, like I kind of like want to like just sit and zone out for a few minutes and then I'll get back to what I'm doing, or like I'll find something else to do. So it's again, that's not really filler, that's a I want to break. So that was just, yeah, a very long-winded way of me saying what we do as humans and in our day-to-day life with people and whatnot, none of it's filler. Everything has its own purpose that we can put into some sort of category and we can find a feeling about. So to put something like filler in your book that doesn't make sense to the story, or like that's not driving something and that doesn't have a purpose, it's not how we live as people, and so it's not going to be interesting to your reader. So especially when you're working and you're editing your book and you're really just looking at it, you're not going to want to have something in a story that you wouldn't need. Like just taking anything and everything out that could potentially be like not usable, or like something that's like kind of like redundant to have in the story. Like that I cut a whole chapter. I've cut like 5 chapters in my book because I'm like, this isn't needed. This is more so just to kind of like fill the gap with this person, but I could place another chapter with this character in a different place. So I don't need to have this chapter. This chapter is redundant. This chapter is like, this chapter is legit filler. And recognizing that is fine. It's more than fine. If you're cutting down chapters more than you are adding them at the moment, that's fine too. Because if you're cutting down filler, that allows you to have more space for chapters that, or like points in your story that will actually have meaning in them. Like, because, okay, I don't want this chapter, I don't want this chapter, I want this chapter. And then after you take all those chapters out and you go through and reread it again for your third draft, you'd be like, okay, I want this chapter and this chapter and this chapter. I could put a flashback there. I can put, a character, or like this character in here, or I can add a scene here, because that like this needs to be explained further on in the story, but I didn't know how to do that previously, but now that I'm reading this, like I'm connecting the dots here. So there's a lot of nuances to storytelling, and I feel like a lot of people don't realize, especially because when it comes to a lot of books, people think like, oh, my book has to be super long and this and that. Like there are extremely successful books that are 50 pages long. There are extremely successful books that are 800 pages long. There are extremely successful books that are 200 pages long, 300, 400, whatever. I'm sure there's a book out there that's probably over 1,000 pages and it's probably very successful. And, like there are also poetry books poems are 1 page long usually. Sometimes they're two, depending on how long they are. And usually, yeah, like they're grouped in like poetry books and whatnot. But there are books where it's a collection from different poets. And so sometimes some poets will only have one poem in that book. That is one, they have 1 page. That's 1 page of their work. That's it. And they wrote something beautiful out in 1 page. Whatever makes sense for your story makes sense for your story. My book isn't going to be as long as the Deathly Hollows are. It's not going to be like 800 pages long, but it's also not going to be as short as some other books that are like 130 pages long. It's going to be kind of in the middle. My guess is around like 300 pages, which is about the usual size for some books, but like it's not going to be as short as like some classics are at like 50 to 70 pages and whatnot. But write what makes sense to your story. Don't try to overextend yourself and overextend your story, especially if your story will make sense in like multiple parts, like you want it to be a duology and whatnot. It's it may seem like, oh, like I want to write a longer book because that's more impressive. Is it more impressive? It can be, but also your book can be 700 pages and not be successful, and then you spent those long ass amounts of time, trying to write this 700-page book when it would have probably been better and sold better if it was 300, because you had more stuff like filler and whatnot, because you're overextending your story, you're dragging your story out, and it's not serving you or your characters or your readers. Because when you think about it, especially if you want to write a book that is geared towards like more like adult, even like YA adult, especially when like writing some adult books, adults don't got a lot of time on their hands. Most of them don't have a lot of time to read and stuff. So like, and they don't, and there's a lot of people that don't like reading series. So if you're making a standalone and it's like 700 pages and it's an adult book and you're not like, and you don't really have an audience, like that might not be the best thing, because there's a lot of people that either don't like long books, they don't want to commit to long books or long series, as well as like they just want something short and sweet, and sometimes that's all it has to be, because when you're creating your story, and especially after, that's why your first draft is just so important, because like that's the foundation and the startings of your story, and you're really feeling into it. It doesn't have to be some big book like this one, the Stephen King book that I have here is 598 pages. It's a big book. This is not the longest book that I've read. Lee Bardugo has a couple bigger books, but this one was more in my reach. Like Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom were like 700 pages, and I did read them, and they were great because she didn't like put a bunch of filler in there and drag out the story very much. It was very much like needed type things in it. And there's also books like Looking for Alaska, which has a Pulitzer Prize and is a Hulu series. I'm looking at the stickers on it. I hate when people put stickers on books, but it's not that big, yet it has a freaking Pulitzer Prize and is one of the best-selling books of all time, and is also a banned book, but it is only 221 pages. It's not that long, yet it's one of the most successful books of all time. So it just really goes to show that whatever works for your story works for your story. It doesn't matter, as long as you are creating something that is true to your characters and your genre and whatever other nuances and stuff that you have going on in your story. Don't focus, especially after your first draft, don't focus on I need to extend it, I need to shorten it, whatever. just focus on things. This needs to be taken out. This needs to be added in. Don't worry about the length of your story, because that's where a lot of people will get wrapped up in their head. Well, I have this word goal and whatnot. And it's great to have word goals and page goals and whatnot. But also, it's a lot more freeing to just focus on your story. In doing writing sprints and writing out like how many words you wrote, like it can feel great. Like, oh, I did a 20-minute sprint and I wrote 500 words. Like, that's great. That's great. And then you also get to look at it like, okay, well, if I have this word goal, like, but I'm not meeting it, but it also doesn't matter for my story. So I feel like having word goals are kind of bullshit, just in the sense that whatever works for your story works for your story. And you're not going to really know what fully works for your story until you become really acquainted in it with like after like the second and the third draft, because then you're really in your story, and then you're probably asking other people to edit it or like other people to read it at that point, and getting feedback from others. So that at that point you're really in your story. And that's when I think, you can kind of set more of those goals. I don't think you should set those goals from the get-go, because I think it's just unhealthy, because like, well, I have to meet this word goal and this and that. But is it necessary for your story? And that's all that I got for today. Thank you so much for watching. You can subscribe right here on YouTube. The podcast is going monthly, so you will see me the first week of March next. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the book and maybe movie related videos that I will be posting almost, my hope is weekly. I don't know if I'll take like a week off or something, but I mostly post on Instagram. And if you want to hear more about my book, Shandon, is over. I post weekly things about my book on my Instagram, Adelina Zach Author, and it'll also be in the link in the description. And if you have any questions, I also have a Google form in the description that I will answer those questions here or over on my Instagram. I have weekly Wednesday posts over there that give more writing advice. If you're looking for if you're looking for any other advice outside of the podcast, I have that as well. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.